February 1948, a distress signal was picked up by multiple ships in the Strait of Malacca. The message came in Morse code. It read, "SOS from Ourang Medan, we float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." A few confused dots and dashes followed. Then two words came through clearly. "I die." Then nothing. The American freighter Silver Star altered course to investigate. When it reached the Ourang Medan, the ship was adrift and silent. A boarding party went across. What they found, every crew member dead, sprawled on their backs, eyes open, faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror, teeth bared, the ship's dog dead mid-snarl. No signs of physical injury on any of the bodies. No blood, no wounds, no visible cause. The meals in the mess hall were half-eaten. The navigation charts were still spread on the table. The tools were in their racks. The radio operator was dead at his station, his fingers still resting on the Morse code transmitter, as if he had died in the act of sending that last message. Then, as the Silver Star prepared to tow the Ourang Medan to port, fire broke out in cargo hold number 4. The lines were cut. The Silver Star pulled back. The Ourang Medan exploded and sank. The ship does not appear in any official registry. No record of its construction, its registration, or its ownership has ever been found. The US Coast Guard published an account of this incident in 1952. It remains the most detailed official record of an event that, according to every available shipping database, never happened. February 1948. The Second World War had been over for less than 3 years. Southeast Asia was in a period of profound instability. Colonial powers attempting to reassert control, independence movements gathering force, former Japanese-occupied territories negotiating the terms of their post-war futures. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow waterway running between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, was one of the most heavily trafficked shipping lanes in the world. It was also, in the late 1940s, one of the most loosely regulated. Ships moved through the strait carrying cargo that was not always declared, under flags that were not always accurate, with ownership structures that were deliberately obscured. The post-war period had created a vast informal economy in the waters of Southeast Asia. Surplus military equipment, goods displaced by wartime destruction, commodities that had changed hands multiple times under conditions of wartime necessity and had never quite re-entered the formal shipping economy. Into this context, a distress signal. 2 American ships, the Silver Star and a vessel called the City of Baltimore, picked up the transmission. Triangulation placed the source somewhere in the strait. The Silver Star altered course. What its crew found when it reached the source of the signal was a ship sitting motionless in calm water, showing no activity and giving no response to hails. The Ourang Medan, as it had identified itself in the distress message, appeared from the outside to be intact. No visible damage, no fire, no listing. Just stillness. The stillness, the boarding party would later note, was the wrong kind. The boarding party from the Silver Star crossed to the Ourang Medan and began a systematic check of the vessel. What they found has been described in multiple sources over the subsequent decades, including, most significantly, in the 1952 issue of the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, published by the United States Coast Guard. The account in that publication remains the most detailed official description of the boarding. The crew of the Ourang Medan was dead, all of them. The captain in the chart room, the officers on the bridge, the crew at their stations and in the passageways, the cook in the galley, the mess hands in the mess hall where food was still on the tables, half eaten, as if the meal had been interrupted. Every person aboard had died in position, not collapsed in flight, not huddled in a corner, not gathered in any way that suggested they had been aware of a threat and attempted to respond to it. They had simply stopped, and their faces. Every account that exists of the Ourang Medan boarding returns, eventually, to the faces. The bodies were found on their backs, eyes open and staring upward, mouths open, teeth bared. The expressions on their faces were described by multiple members of the boarding party as expressions of absolute terror. Not pain, not confusion, but something more specific than that. Something that suggested the men had seen something in the final seconds of their lives that they had been unable to process or defend against. The ship's dog was found dead in the same condition. Mid-snarl, as if it had been aware of whatever was coming and had tried, instinctively, to warn it away. None of the bodies showed any signs of physical injury. The radio operator's position tells a specific story. He was found at his station, not slumped over it, not collapsed away from it, but sitting upright, his fingers resting on the Morse code transmitter, in the position of someone who had been operating it. He had died at his duty station, in the act of transmitting. The message he had sent was the one the Silver Star had received. The SS Ourang, the report of the dead officers and crew, the final I die. The boarding party's account, as published in the Coast Guard's 1952 record, notes that the radio operator's position was consistent with someone who had continued transmitting for as long as he was physically able. He had not fled his station. He had not attempted to reach the deck or a lifeboat. He had stayed at the transmitter and sent the message until he could no longer send. This raises a specific question about the timeline. If the radio operator was alive when he began the SOS message, and he must have been because he sent it, and he was dead when the boarding party arrived, then the process by which the crew died was not instantaneous. It took long enough for the radio operator to understand what was happening, compose and transmit a detailed message, and then die at his station. But it killed every other person on the ship, officers on the bridge, crew at their posts, the cook in the galley, without any of them apparently having time to respond to whatever was happening. The radio operator's position is the most detailed piece of evidence about the mechanism of death. It is also the most difficult to explain. A substance that kills quickly enough to take down every member of a crew simultaneously without warning signs severe enough to produce flight response should also have killed the radio operator before he could compose and transmit a multi-sentence distress message, unless the radio operator was somewhere on the ship that provided, at least briefly, some degree of protection, or unless the deaths did not happen simultaneously. The timeline has never been adequately reconstructed. The radio operator's position tells a specific story. He was found at his station, not slumped over it, not collapsed away from it, but sitting upright, his fingers resting on the Morse code transmitter, in the position of someone who had been operating it. He had died at his duty station, in the act of transmitting. The message he had sent was the one the Silver Star had received. The SS Ourang, the report of the dead officers and crew, the final I die. The boarding party's account, as published in the Coast Guard's 1952 record, notes that the radio operator's position was consistent with someone who had continued transmitting for as long as he was physically able. He had not fled his station. He had not attempted to reach the deck or a lifeboat. He had stayed at the transmitter and sent the message until he could no longer send. This raises a specific question about the timeline. If the radio operator was alive when he began the SOS message, and he must have been because he sent it, and he was dead when the boarding party arrived, then the process by which the crew died was not instantaneous. It took long enough for the radio operator to understand what was happening, compose and transmit a detailed message, and then die at his station. But it killed every other person on the ship, officers on the bridge, crew at their posts, the cook in the galley, without any of them apparently having time to respond to whatever was happening. The radio operator's position is the most detailed piece of evidence about the mechanism of death. It is also the most difficult to explain. A substance that kills quickly enough to take down every member of a crew simultaneously, without warning signs severe enough to produce flight response, should also have killed the radio operator before he could compose and transmit a multi-sentence distress message. Unless the radio operator was somewhere on the ship that provided, at least briefly, some degree of protection, or unless the deaths did not happen simultaneously. The timeline has never been adequately reconstructed. 1947 and 1948 were specific years in the post-war history of East Asia. Japan's Unit 731, the Imperial Army's covert biological and chemical warfare research program, based in Manchuria, had been conducting experiments with chemical and biological agents throughout the war. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the fate of Unit 731's research, its agents, and its stockpiles was the subject of significant intelligence interest by multiple Allied powers. Documents declassified in the 1990s confirmed that the United States had negotiated with Unit 731's commander, Shiro Aishi, for access to the program's research data, in exchange for immunity from war crimes prosecution for the scientists involved. This arrangement was kept secret for decades. The question of what happened to Unit 731's physical stockpiles, the chemical and biological agents that had been produced and stored in Manchuria, has never been fully resolved. Some were destroyed, some were recovered by Soviet forces. The disposition of the remainder is not documented in any public record. The Ourang Medan incident, if it happened, occurred in 1947 or 1948. The ship, whatever it was, appears to have been operating from Chinese ports, carrying cargo that was not declared, destined for a South American country with a history of receiving post-war European and East Asian fugitives and contraband. We are not saying the Ourang Medan was carrying Unit 731 material. We are noting that the historical context makes the unmanifested Chinese cargo the ship's apparent attempt to avoid official registration, and the death of the crew by an unidentified agent without physical wounds consistent with the kind of operation that was taking place in the region at exactly that time. We found something in the records of the U.S. Occupation Administration in Japan, documents from 1947 and 1948 that have been partially declassified, that references a shipping operation in Southeast Asia involving chemical material recovery. The specific vessel names in those documents are redacted, but the geographic area, the timeline, and the description of the cargo type overlap with the Ourang Medan story in ways that are difficult to attribute entirely to coincidence. We are not drawing a conclusion. We are laying it out. The most fundamental problem with the Ourang Medan story is the one that is also, in a sense, its most interesting feature. The ship does not appear in any registry, not in Lloyd's Register of Shipping, the most comprehensive record of commercial vessels operating in the mid-20th century, not in Dutch maritime records. And the Ourang Medan was supposedly a Dutch vessel, not in Indonesian, British, American, or Singapore records. The Silver Star's official log, which is part of the public record, contains no reference to the Ourang Medan rescue. And yet, in 1952, the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, published by the United States Coast Guard, ran a detailed account of the incident, describing it as perhaps one of the most perturbing sea dramas of its era. The publication noted the distress message, the boarding, the dead crew, the explosion. It presented the account as factual. The US Coast Guard does not publish fiction. The absence of registration records for a ship, in the context of post-war Southeast Asia, is not unusual for vessels operating outside formal commercial frameworks. Ships were bought, sold, reflagged, renamed, and operated under layers of ownership that were specifically designed to prevent tracing. A vessel carrying undeclared cargo in 1947 would have had every incentive to avoid formal registration. What the absence of records cannot explain is why the Silver Star's official log contains no reference to the rescue. If the rescue happened, the Silver Star's log should record it. Maritime law requires vessels to log significant events, and responding to an SOS, finding a crew of dead sailors, and witnessing a ship explode qualifies. The absence from the Silver Star's log is the most specific evidence that the Ourang Medan story, in the form it has been told, is either fictional or significantly altered from whatever actually happened. We believe something happened in the Strait of Malacca in early 1948. We believe the account that was published in the Italian newspaper in 1940, in the Dutch Indonesian newspaper in 1948, in the US Coast Guard Journal in 1952, is a version of something real, shaped by the requirements of people who needed it to be told a particular way. We don't know exactly what happened, but the gap between what the official record contains and what the official record should contain, if the story happened as described, is the shape of something being kept from view. Here is what we know. In February 1948, a distress signal was received from a ship called the Ourang Medan. A boarding party found the entire crew dead, faces frozen in terror, no visible wounds, cold air in tropical waters. The radio operator died at his station. The ship exploded and sank before the cargo could be examined. No record of the ship exists in any official maritime registry. The Silver Star's log contains no reference to the rescue. The US Coast Guard published an account of the incident in 1952. Here is what we don't know. What killed the crew? What was in hold number 4? Who owned the ship? Whether the cargo was chemical, biological, or something else entirely. Whether the connection to post-war intelligence operations in East Asia is meaningful or coincidental. And whether the story, as it has been told for 80 years, is a version of something real, or something designed to function as a version of something real. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment. Because somewhere at the bottom of the Strait of Malacca, there is a ship that officially never existed, and whatever it was carrying when it went down is still there.